Well, thank you everybody for coming today. Thank you for being creative with the seats too. So hello, I'm Samantha. I'm the lead educator at the Wichita-Sedgwick County Historical Museum, and welcome to March's Senior Wednesday. It's going by too fast already. I turned 30 this year, so I'm panicking. No. You're all laughing at me, I know. I know. I'm allowed, I swear. So our Senior Wednesday program is every January through October at 10 a.m. on the fourth Wednesday of the month, and a related museum tour will follow the program. It's hosted by the museum and its friends group and are generously funded by the Charles and Joanne McIlwaine Foundation. And today I have the pleasure of introducing Celeste Racette, a tireless advocate and unofficial auditor of Wichita with roots deeply I was creative, I swear. With roots deeply embedded in the city's history, Celeste's journey from bank examiner to civic watchdog is both inspiring and impactful. Her leadership in the Save Century 2 movement, alongside a distinguished career uncovering financial malpractice, underscores her commitment to accountability. Celeste's dedication to preserving Wichita's heritage and scrutinizing municipal affairs has earned her widespread respect. Please join me in welcoming Celeste.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I have to begin by saying thank you to Eric Kale and Jan Meyer and the Sedgwick County Historic Museum, their board and their members, for allowing me to speak today. This is so exciting, and what a wonderful crowd. Thank you all for coming. I see some Save Century 2 t-shirts, which is really awesome. So anyway, thank you for coming. I really, really appreciate it. Now, I've never talked for an hour. I'll try to cut it short, but if I refer to notes, will you please forgive me, but I want to make sure I cover all that I want to say about this magnificent building. So the first slide, Dean Bradley is an architect who's here with his partner, and Dean is an outstanding architect. He spoke last month on modern architecture. So I had to start with this, Dean, because we're tagging after each other. All right, so I'm founder and chair of Save Century 2, and I love this picture because it's right in front of the magnificent building. I'm not an architect, which is really funny, isn't it, that I'm not an architect, but I am an accountant. And I grew up here, so I lived in the College Hill neighborhood, another historic neighborhood. And then in Indiana, where I lived with my first marriage, we got it historically designated. Also, it was called Hills and Dales across from Purdue University. And I've also done a lot of neat projects repurposing old buildings. I'm really proud of the Rainforest Room. I don't have 30 minutes to talk about it, but we repurposed a 60-year-old locker room in the Happy Hollow Elementary School, and it was amazing with the waterfall. But anyway, so I've done a lot of activism with historic architecture and buildings. As Samantha said, I was a bank examiner at the end of my career with the FDIC. I lived in Atlanta, and I also lived here in Wichita, of course, came back home. And these are some of the great people I worked with in the FDIC. And yes, I loved fraud investigation and was pretty good at it. That's another 60-minute story. So Save Century 2 actually started when my first grandchild was born in July 2019. It was the boathouse meeting, and my father had passed away, and I was going through his papers, and I was so excited about hearing of riverfront plans that I went. But to my great chagrin, the plans that were presented destroyed Century 2 and destroyed the Brutalist Library. And at that meeting, there was no discussion. You were not allowed to comment, and it was closed to any kind of discussion about either building. And I was actually kicked out of the meeting, but that's a long story. So let's just say I left quietly and then came back with a bang. So what's really cool about Century 2, it is linked to Wichita in ways that I wish those people at the boathouse meeting understood. Back in the early days, Wichita started as a trading site because it was important to trade. The Native American Indians actually camped on the riverbank, and they considered it a sacred area where the big and the little Arkansas joined together. And I want to say one thing about that. It was around the time of the Civil War that Indian traders located posts in and near the site. Jesse Chisholm, James Meade, Buffalo Bill Matheson, and William Dutch Bill Griffenstein. The Douglas Street Bridge over the river leading into downtown Wichita was the site of the famous "Check Your Guns." It was a law aimed at cowboys passing through on cattle drives from Texas to Abilene on the Chisholm Trail. The law was enforced by the likes of Buffalo Bill and Wyatt Earp. So the city was formed in 1870, and here's a shot of Douglas and Maine. I know, isn't it funny? I'm glad I didn't grow up during that time or had children during that time. Several popular destinations are still in that area, as you know, Old Town, Delano, Century 2, the Ball Stadium, and Intrust Arena. So in the 1960s, Wichita was coming up on its centennial year. And you know what's really cool? What happened next? We voted. We voted on whether we wanted a new civic center. And I can't think of another instance since that time where we voted on river development. But we voted, and the citizens said we'll spend $15 million. Century 2, $12 million, library 2.4, and they started off, and the goal was they wanted a civic center perceived as a place of constant activity, the living room of the community, genuine and without pretense. And here's the descriptions: friendly, hospitable, and charming. So the city hired the best of the best, and this is in the historic registry paperwork I wrote, which is so cool about our city commission at that time. Architect consultant William Wesley Peters of the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation was hired to provide guidance for the architectural plans. Dr. Vern Knudsen from Los Angeles was hired as acoustics consultant. He had done scientific research on World War II sonar equipment and had been published in Scientific America. His other projects included MGM Sound Studio and the Hollywood Bowl. Dr. Knudsen consulted on the Marin Veterans Memorial Auditorium with Wesley Peters and Taliesin Associates, so he was intimately familiar with Frank Lloyd Wright and had worked with him before. George Eisenhower was the state equipment consultant, and he had an engineering background, and he too had worked on the Marin Veterans Memorial Auditorium and knew Frank Lloyd Wright. A lot of influence on Frank Lloyd Wright here. Dana Price was the electrical engineer, Dudley Williams, structural engineer, and EB Construction was chosen as the general contractor. John H. Hickman and Associates was selected for architecture because they were well known for mid-century modern architecture. This movement emphasizes ample windows, open floor plans, and bringing the outdoors inside. Function was also important, with a particular emphasis on structural efficiencies. Architect Dean Bradley covered the buildings in Wichita, so I won't go over these. Just know that John Hickman's buildings, several like the Vickers Petroleum Building, are also on the National Registry. Here is the first known sketch of Century 2, and we have no idea who drew it. But it was at the time that Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation was the consultants, so it's interesting. It could be by Frank Lloyd Wright or approved by him. So this is your first mystery, you sleuths out there, to solve. As the plan progressed, controversy arose. Were there enough seats in Concert Hall? Would the size of the auditorium be big enough? And then tragedy struck. President Kennedy was assassinated in November 1963, so the City Commission passed a resolution to commemorate his passing. And the John Fitzgerald Kennedy Memorial Mall was built to honor Mr. and Mrs. Kennedy, and I quote, "avid interest in the cultural development of our land." It was a time of mourning for our nation. Architect John Hickman gave in to his depression and committed suicide. Plans were halted as city commissions struggled to figure out how to proceed. Hickman's associate, Roy Varenhorst, stepped up to the challenge and assured the then mayor, Vincent Bogart, the design concept of John Hickman is developed to the point where it can be completed as planned. City Commission unanimously agreed. Varenhorst took over. A new contract was signed, and off they went. And this is a 3D model of Century 2. That's Roy Varenhorst on the left, my father on the right, and there's drawings behind them on the wall. Can you see those? Okay. Ground was broken on January 25th, 1966 with a blast of dynamite and powder. Here's your first fun fact. What band do you think was chosen to play out of local high schools? North High alumni here. Your band played. Fun fact number 2, the explosion was ignited with an old-fashioned plunger. You don't see that much anymore today. But my favorite story about the construction of Century 2 came from Jim Greer. He's on the left. And when we spoke at Larksfield, I speak a lot, he told me a funny story. He was the foreman on the site and a young man. And when they were beginning, and that's Martin Eby on the right, the first time he was presented with an argument, it was a city official arguing over where the point for the circle was to begin. And we're talking about less than 5 inches, but it was an intense argument. And Jim Greer says he laughs today because the building itself is over an acre, right? But the city official is arguing about where the point of the radius starts. So Jim gave in, and they began with that point, and from there spread the construction. I think that's a funny story. Now, with the blessing of Ellen Hickman, and this is her son, he's a planner, urban planner, she gave me permission to share with you some photos that I have never shown to a group before. And it is the construction of Century 2. So enjoy. That's her mother. I want to say something right here. Pilings were driven to a depth of 30 feet. A floor of reinforced concrete was poured over the entire excavation, supplying the base on which the building rests. The heart of Century 2 is this center concrete core. Every structural element attaches to the center of the circle that is Century 2. Outer walls support 15-ton steel trusses that in turn support the concrete roof. These trusses were set in place by a giant crane with a 225-foot boom. There's the roof going up. The plastering of the interior was being staged with the setup of a secure skeleton of scaffolding stretching from the floors to the ceilings. Now think of that inside Century 2. Think of Concert Hall. From the floor to the ceiling of Concert Hall was filled with scaffolding. Diamond-cut metal lathing materials were tied to the supporting cold-rolled steel channels that were suspended with long metal tie wires from the building's steel rafters. Some of the metal tie wires were up to 60 feet in length and had to carry the completed metal lath and plaster system load. The gypsum needed for this plaster was brought from a mine located in Sun City, Kansas, and manufactured into plaster in Medicine Lodge. The plaster work on the ceiling and high side walls was hand-trialed by the plasters as they stood on the temporary scaffolding set up inside the building. The scratch coat was first, followed by the brown coat, and the third finish coat of either smooth or texture finish. The lathing and plastering craftsmen were some of the best. Mr. Howard Guerrer supervised the mixing of coloring agent into the stucco and sand mix to maintain a consistent buff color. And if you want to know how tricky it is to make that buff color, look at how they've repaired the stairs on Century 2. And when you see the plain concrete repair work, it doesn't even match that beautiful buff finish that they mixed when they built Century 2. Let's see. The option of work alternatives was exercised to add more decorative materials to the building, such as terrazzo flooring, colored concrete, we just talked about that, it was colored too, aluminum railing. These are the extras. All right, now this is my favorite part. The design elements of Century 2 are unique to us, to Kansans. Blue roof for the Kansas sky, and it's beautiful today, so go outside and just look at Century 2 and think, that's our sky. Sand-colored columns for wheat. See these vertical, they're called convex, I won't even go into the description, but they're like football spheres going up and down. Every 10 degrees, they place these without sophisticated computer equipment. Parapets. I didn't know what parapets were because I'm not an architect, but they're the bands 1, 2, 3, and they represent the horizon. When you look out in the prairie and you see the sky meet the ground, there's a horizon band, right? That's what they build into those 3 parapets. I had no idea. The grand opening was January 1969 with Governor Docking's inaugural. And I actually have that book up here. I brought it for you to take a look after the presentation. It was my dad's copy. Dean's Designs, have you ever been to the Belmont restaurant? Dean's Designs was there, and Dean and his mother, Joyce White, ran Dean's Designs. When they opened this, they decorated the tables for this big inaugural ball, and they had peacocks chained outside so they couldn't escape on the grounds. So we had peacocks. So this is what the inaugural program looks like. That's the cover. I've got it on the table. And now we're going to look inside. And again, it's on the table, but I'd ask you not to touch it. I've got it open to Century 2, but I try to be careful with it because I don't know of any other copies. This is what Roy Varenhorst said. Culture is the best of what we are and what we hope to become. That's pretty awesome, isn't it? And remember, their goal is to make it affordable. Now, this is really detailed. I'll pause, but again, it goes back to the Native American Indians and the wigwams and the rounded curvature of the roof, and that's in this book. This is my favorite architectural drawing before there were sophisticated computer models. They drew these plans every 10 degrees on a circle. So there's how many columns? 36 for the mathematicians. Yep, look how beautifully, and they match this. Martin Eby will tell you, Jim Greer unfortunately passed away. They were so proud. All the people who worked on this building were so proud of the work they did. This is a cross section. It's again in this book, showing the theater. There's another cross section of concert hall. Now we're just going to flip through some photos of Century 2 on the inside. Photos of the interior. Now think, they hand troweled the curves and the arches. Why? Because they wanted, Dr. Vern Knudsen was very specific about how sound carries, and all of this was designed for the best magnification of sound throughout Concert Hall. Well, there's room to build sets, and that's why we get Disney productions, because we can build the sets here, and then we rent them to go out on the road with music theater. That's pretty awesome. Convention hall, which can open up with more seating. Again, hand trowel to get the curve above the stage. This is my favorite. This is where our April 18th event will be in Mary Jane Teal, named after a beloved theater leader here in Wichita. But this is original coloring. And again, look at the curved walls. Exhibition hall. Now, it does need work. I'm not going to deny that. It does need updating, but rehearsal and dressing areas, meeting rooms. All right, how many of you know there's something special in Exhibition Hall? Raise your hand. Whoa, that's pretty good, because not a lot of people know what a unique gift is hidden in Exhibition Hall. The New York Paramount Theater commissioned one of the grandest and biggest Wurlitzer organs for the theater. And it was called the Wurlitzer 285 Fox Special. When the theater closed in 1964, the organ went into storage, but Clarence Coleman, the DeVore Foundation, Charles Slauson, Dwayne Wallace, and the Wichita mayor, Clarence Vollmer, raised $40,000 to buy that Wurlitzer. The instrument was loaded onto 4.5 semi-trailers and moved to Wichita. On December 1972, it premiered to a crowd of 2,000 people. The console has 4 keyboards, 366 stops, and over 2,000 pipes, weighing in at a staggering 50,000 pounds. And I've been in it's a really scary stairway that goes up all the way for the pipes for them to do maintenance. But it's built into Exhibition Hall. It's really incredible. They do silent films and sing-alongs. And Save Century 2, we partner with them. That's why I like to showcase them as well. Had their 50th anniversary celebration, and Brett Valiant, you all know him? You know what? He heard a Wurlitzer for the first time when he was young, and he was so blown away by the sound that he went on to learn the instrument, and now he is one of the premier Wurlitzer performers, and he plays almost every day as part of his job in Arizona. So we fly him in for concerts. And then Sierra Scott emceed. I had to help her change into her second gown. That lady knows how to dress. I've never zipped up the back of a ball gown on someone stacked so beautifully as she is. So this is really fun. There's so many centennial memorabilia, and if you have any I'm not mentioning, I'd love to know about them. But I've got 3 of these whiskey decanters. This is something I taped in my scrapbook, so I apologize that it's marred down the middle where I had the Scotch tape. But this is from the Centennial, and at the top is Century 2, to the left is the Native American wigwams, and to the right is wheat grain elevators. So isn't that amazing? They handed these out. They're wooden nickels. A snow globe. I love this because it's got the Epic Center, the Art Museum, this building, and an airplane. Now this is a fun fact number 3 that you may not know. Black Bear Moses, John Hickman, and Roy Varenhorst knew each other. Back in the day, before their careers took off, they were graphic designers for aircraft industry. Did you know that? And so they knew each other, and they supported each other as their careers progressed. So as a compliment to Varenhorst and Hickman, Black Bear Bozen drew this beautiful picture called Wichita, My Son. There's Century 2, and there's the Brutalist Library. Isn't that amazing? Our first office in Sandlin Realty offices, I walked out in the hallway and I looked, and I was stunned that he had this on the wall, Colby Sandlin. He was one of our first early supporters. Such a cool picture. All right, so these are fun. These are handbills I've collected over the years. Elton John came in 1974, James Gang in 72, and then Francois Hubrax. Anyone remember Francois? Remember when he came out on the stage in his red velvet pantsuit and the sound was on? And you could hear the engineering techs say, "Look at that SOB, who does he think he is?" He didn't stay long in Wichita. But he was from Europe, and kudos to him. He embraced Mahler and other composers who don't usually were on the ticket. Okay. Whoops. All right, I remember this vividly. I'm a violinist, okay? My parents always supported Wichita Symphony, and Catherine Lumbar, my violin teacher who lived on Old Manor, she was one of the charter members of the Wichita Symphony. So I got stories when they played at East. Yes, I'm that old. But I'll never forget when Jack Benny came. He was so funny. He was so amusing. He was with the symphony on the stage. And poor Caesar, who is our concert master, first chair, Jack Benny teased him mercilessly during the performance. And then suddenly, Jack Benny took out his violin and played beautifully. And I was stunned. And so the notes in the program tell you that he was an accomplished violinist who started playing before in his youth, I think when he was 9. And he went around and realized he was more funny and made more money as a comedian, but he went around and did these benefits for free. He helped raise money for the symphony. So this is a program I saved. All right, so Century 2 is worth preserving, and I call it the Century District. This one block area right here, I call it the Century District. We've got this beautiful building, Proudfoot and Bird from 1890. We got Carnegie Library next door, which is Beaux Art style, 1950. The Broadview Hotel, 1920. Central Public Library, 1964. They built it before Century 2 was completed. And the Garvey Building. Next slide, please. So we created here we go. So one thing I did when we realized we were up against developers, this is the story of David and Goliath. We knew that we were up against money, power, developers. I mean, I could tell at the boathouse, they all knew each other, they knew what they were going to do, and that's why the public was not allowed to speak. So here I go, getting into action. So I spent a solid 2 months writing the National Registry, and it's up here. In fact, I'll pass it around if you want to glance through it. Painstakingly, but I had a lot of help. Dean Bradley, Robert McLaughlin, George Smart, who's coming April 18th. I had a lot of help, so kudos to the people who helped me. We started a municipal petition to have a vote. You can do that. You know, we have the right as citizens to do a petition to put something on. And then they sued me. I've never been sued by the city before. My kids are kind of impressed. Have you all ever been sued by the city? It's a challenge when they knock at the door with the summons. We did fundraising, we did free public forums, and then we did our yard signs. And we set up a website. Here we go. It's still there. I try to keep it updated. Save Century 2, and of course, you know our t-shirts. Next slide. We teamed up with great people. That's Dee Starkey, another local historian, and that's our treasurer, Greg Kite, John Todd, lots of people, Jean Ann Cusick. Cutie supporting our button. We turned the votes in, and we were successful. Go ahead, go on with the next slide. They did pass City Council Policy number 38, which says citizens should vote to determine the fate. Now let's hope the new council doesn't overturn that. I can't imagine they would, because we have a lot of political clout. And they realized they made a mistake when they saw the outcry against destroying both buildings. So we're supposed to be able to vote on the fate. Okay. Here's our offices at 3330 West Douglas, my husband's law firm. We've done more than just complain and fight. The Joan of Arc flower beds, and that's a whole nother story I talk about when I am a speaker. That was a gift of gratitude. Do you all know that? The story of Joan of Arc? Raise your hand if you know the story of Joan of Arc. We are so lucky it took the Palace of Versailles permission to create that bronze that's sitting across the street. And the other sister to that is in Orléans, France, only it's a bullet riddled with holes from World War II. Because it was our men, my dad was a World War II Army fighter pilot, it was our Kansas infantrymen that liberated Orléans from the Nazis in World War II. And we should be teaching that story to school children throughout the city. So this is what it looked like before, and then I grabbed one of my sons and we got 7 flats of flowers, and this is what it looks like now. And Wichita area sister cities partners with us to beautify those flower beds. Then we got real aggressive, and I looked at A. Price Woodard Park, which looked like this. And I was like, wow, this is dedicated to the first black Wichita mayor. He was a friend of my dad's, and I was appalled. So amazingly, Lowe's gave us their Heroes Project. Treetop Nursery kicked in. We got money for tools, plants, mulch. And now this is what it looks like. Next slide. Yeah. Thank you. The city of Wichita, I want to give them credit too. When they saw what we were doing, Dave McGuire, who's now retired, and Troy Houtman, and with Layton's blessing, took care of the rusted railing, cleaned it up, and turned the fountains on. So they've been good partners. When they've seen what we're doing, they have joined in. Not always the first to join in, but they've joined in, and I appreciate those mutual efforts. So, where are we at now? The latest downtown plans show that they're going to reinvigorate Century 2 in the library, but they're on there. Yay. Next slide. And now we're going to celebrate. They're changing the roof. Have you seen the new roof? Finally. I want you to pass around. When we were gardening at Joan of Arc and Price Woodard Park, we'd find these on the street, in the flower beds. And so I spoke before City Council and said I had a gift for them all to remember their term on council by. And I had one of these in a baggie for each of them. And I said, this is the roof of Century 2 that you've allowed to decay for 20 years. And now we got a new roof. And doesn't she look grand? Beautiful, beautiful bright blue again, just gorgeous. And people have been sending me pictures from flying in, how it pops. So here's our next celebration for the Blue Roof. This is open and free to the public. I hope to see every one of you here. So take one of these flyers. We'd prefer you RSVP at the website just so we know how much cake to get, because we're going to celebrate. And ASM Global, who manages Century 2, is kicking in with refreshments. We've got a speaker. He's George Smart. He's called Mr. Modernist, and he's CEO and founder of U.S. Modernist, which is dedicated to preserving the modernist movement. And he was given an honorary American Institute of Architects award for his work. And this guy is in North Carolina, and I'll never forget calling him and saying, help me, I'm from Wichita, Kansas, and I'm trying to write the historic registry for a building, and I know nothing about architecture. And bless his heart, he talked with me week after week to tell me what to do, how to get started, and he featured me on his podcast and been an avid supporter. So he's coming April 18th, and I'd love to see all of you there. It's free, no charge. And we're even thinking of doing some sort of, I'm going to tell you a secret. We're thinking of doing a little memento like that wooden nickel. But we're not publicizing that too much because we know it'll be like a limited edition, probably 100 to the first 100. But anyway, so we're going to have entrepreneur Bill Warren, design specialist Robert McLaughlin, and architect Dean Bradley on our panel of experts that night. And this is George Smart again, and he actually leads tours throughout the world highlighting modernist architecture. So if any of you like to travel, I think the next place they're going to is Belgium and London, and they leave in May. So he's very active in preserving modern buildings. Here's our panel of experts, good-looking bunch of men. I think Patrick would agree. So there's a 10-year plan for building repairs, and it's really interesting. I brought a copy with me if you're interested in seeing it. But they are going to take care of the building, and I'm so excited about that. Now here's some cool photos. There's our unique skyline. Aren't these beautiful? Okay, fun fact. How many of you know we have a connection with Star Wars? Nobody? Do you know our connection with Star Wars? Century 2 was the inspiration for the city of Naboo in Star Wars. George Lucas lived in California and admired that building. Now, remember how I said Dr. Vern Knudsen and Eisenhower had worked on that building too? So it's really funny how back in the day, that same building influenced Century 2 and then later influenced George Lucas when he designed the city of Naboo. There it is. That's the Marin Civic Center in California. Looks a lot like our building, doesn't it? And go back to that original drawing. Looks a lot like that original drawing. And he's in our office. You know who that is, don't you? Luke Skywalker. I borrowed that from my youngest son. He doesn't need it now anyway, but yeah, so that's our tie with Star Wars. Okay. So this is from the movie George Clooney's Up in the Air. And why did he pick us? Because you know when you're over the city that that's Wichita, Kansas. These are my favorite drawings by Richard Krausen, who's the cartoonist for the Eagle. And that's my favorite. See Century 2 up there in the middle? Wait, go back to that. Yeah, see it's up there, Century 2. We have this hanging in our office. I bought a copy from him. Just love that one. I think it's central to Wichita, okay? And now I got to close by saying this. Monday, we're the final 3 finalists that the city listened to. We had to go and present another PowerPoint. I've been doing PowerPoints all week. To use the former library. Now, why is the former library a slide here? Because it was built at the same time, and it is another absolutely stunning mid-century architecture. It is a brutalist building. How many of you know what brutalist stands for? Good. It comes from the French word brute, raw. That's right, raw. So brut Breton means raw concrete. And when brutalist was a brief 10-year period, really short, but people felt like it represented the way things were. Realism, perhaps ugly, but truthful. So you have this juxtaposition of light opens windows and then dark, heavy, angular concrete. And I'll tell you another fun fact about the library. It is so unique. It is the only building in Wichita that has won a National Merit Award from the American Institute of Architects. The only one. So Julius Schulman is a famed photographer of architect, and he was hired by Schaefer, Schirmer, and Eflin, the architects at the time, to come to Wichita and take this picture, which is now in the Getty Museum, of this fabulous building. And the fountains are gone, but Joan of Arc, is standing to the east. And so when you leave and you see the beautiful tulips blooming, it's the volunteers that help me and Wichita area sister cities that keep the flower beds beautiful, because there was nothing there before but dirt and weeds. So take a minute to appreciate it. And to the city's benefit, when we cleaned up the flower beds, Bernadette Bradshaw was getting ready to retire, and she took a small amount of her remaining budget to get a little plaque and put by the statue. So you now know it is a gift of gratitude for World War II infantrymen that liberated the city. And that just, every time I clean it up, I think of the people who have served our country and traveled overseas because they cared enough to put their lives on the line. So anyway, that's a very special relationship, and we're going to try to save this building too. Though I won't show you the ugly pictures, I'll just talk about it. The roof is leaking. They've neglected the roof there, just worse than they have Century 2. And I could show you pictures, but I promised them I wouldn't until the RFP process was done. But it's flooded in the basement, the roof is leaked, the children's theater has mold and drippings on the wall, and the tiles are falling off throughout the upstairs. I mean, and so when we had our meeting with the city reps on Monday, because we're the final 3 finalists to use the building, they said, well, we're expecting everyone to take care of the building. I said, wait a minute, you've neglected the building. You need to put about $5 million into that building. But this historic tax credits, we've got it on the historic registry too. So I'm going to pass this around to Robert McLaughlin wrote that. I guess I inspired him after I wrote Century 2. So the library is now in the historic registry and is eligible for tax credits. So I chided them. You know me, I'm going to speak the truth. I'm a brutalist person, I guess. I didn't think about that. But I did chide them Monday and said, you need to repair the roof for anybody who moves into this building. So we'll see if it gets in the capital improvement projects. But anyway, so thank you for coming. Thank you. Now, questions. The last slide is questions. And this is one of my favorite parts. Questions. I love to take questions.